Hi and good evening. Welcome to the WNPS monthly public lecture. I'm your host, Graham. We'll be talking today. We have two speakers today, a little unusual. I think we've had that once before, but we normally have one speaker, but we have two very interesting speakers joining us this evening. The WNPS and the High Commission of Canada have been sharing this is the second of a series of lectures, and we're pleased to share experts today from OceanWise, a globally recognized Canadian ocean conservation organization, which works on various fields such as plastic pollution, and one such which we're going to talk today about sustainable fishing and really sustainable consumption of marine food, of fish, of food, particularly marine originated food. Thank our sponsors NTB for supporting the monthly lectures. Loris, Warnam, Kids Wetland Walk. Thank you very much. You've stood by us all along and continue to stand by us. We acknowledge our corporate sponsors NTB, NDB, Sampath Bank, Mr. Ajit Costa, PJ, Brandix, JK Office Automation, Sanjay Sparsilon, Columba Jewelry Stores, and Abans. As you know, there's a lot going on around us. You don't have to, you just open the newspaper, or you open a news channel, or you open a social media page. You see around you the amount of destruction that's taking place in the environment. And naturally, organizations such as us would have to step up to the challenge, and we rely and address it on all fronts, from the legal front, from the lobbying front, the education front. It's a multi-pronged approach that we need to take, and your financial support to support us to ensure that the destruction is minimized, and we really preserve the fantastic biodiversity that we have in this country. We really need to get out there and fight this. So anything that you would, in any way that you would like to contribute financially, ideally, come in and join us. In any of our committees, just give us a call, log into our website, and make your donations, or contact us. Interestingly, there's something very unique that the WNPS is doing, also current, taking into consideration the current situation. The youth wing of the WNPS is creating the largest ecocide mural in Sri Lanka, 20 by 70 foot mural to raise awareness on the ongoing deforestation. The mural will be on display at Viharamadevi Park. It has been there. We started this program last weekend. Tomorrow, go out there, 4 p.m. onwards, and show your support, contribute, make a sketch, take your chance at painting, and join us all in depicting and in trying as a mark of awareness and a mark of protest to what's going on around us. So tomorrow, 4 p.m. at Viharamadevi Park, do come and join us in creating this mural. We thank CJ and the team at Salva Advertising for the creative support. Just a little nudge again, as we always do at all our lectures, for those of you who have not paid up for 2021, you just have to click and pay online. Really do appreciate that, particularly in the current context. We invite non-members to join WNPS. Applications are available online again on our website. You can now apply online, pay up your annual subs. Very simple, click away. Interestingly, those of you who are regular visitors to Yala, you have a new home. The Yala bungalow, which the WNPS runs, is going to be available shortly, and we're doing quite a few repairs on it to make that a more comfortable destination for all of you who would like to go and stay there, and we encourage you to stay there. We'll probably be ready at the end of the month. Also looking for any form of assistance which will help us make that a better place and make your trip to Yala more comfortable. So do keep that in mind. And obviously after that, when the notice comes to you, please do patronize. We've got a new home. That's the WNPS bungalow in Yala. with a facelift. Looking at your participation on social media, encourage you to post on any platform that you use, Instagram, Facebook, tweets, events. Remember to tag the WNPS social media handles when doing so. Yeah, so now getting on to the two areas, as I was saying, one is obviously about the seafood industry. And as we know, about 1 billion people around the globe depend on seafood as a primary source of protein, and consumption levels have increased exponentially. And in fact, we sit down and eat at a restaurant, we probably don't realize that out there, that's a product of overfishing, which is one of the biggest threats facing our oceans today. And we can safely say that 90% of the world's fish stocks are now fully fished or overfished. It is indeed a serious problem. An interesting stat, probably some of you know this, but the per capita consumption of fish has risen since the 1960s, from where it averaged something like 9.9 kilograms to over 22 kilograms in 2020. So as the population keeps growing, the need for sustainable and healthy protein sources, which we all need without doubt, and seafood is one such, will play an important role. So we all did think resources from our oceans, plenty of fish in the sea, is what we all say, but in fact, it's not the case. There's not so many fish in the sea anymore. We got to really watch. It's not unlimited, right? So the next time we sit down to have a meal, do keep that in mind, and do take note of what you hear today in relation to that. As far as plastics is concerned, I really don't need to go into too much detail. You just take a walk on the beach and you know what's going on. We live in an island. It is much a problem, as you all know. 800 marine species are at threat because of this. From the smallest plankton right up up to the whales. So I mean it's just engulfs the whole of the ocean. I'm not going to dwell, but again, you can imagine with consumption and population increases, how that's going to be if it's not managed. Yeah, so the two speakers tonight, Sophika Kostyniuk leads the Ocean-Wise Fisheries and Seafood Program, which has been guiding the seafood industry and consumers to choose sustainably harvested seafood since 2005. Very interestingly, choosing sustainably harvested seafood is very important. Over 3,000 business partner locations across 11 countries. So those of you listening in, probably this is going to be a very interesting piece of information and an hour that you'll spend listening to Sophika. The Ocean-Wise Seafood Program is focused on growing into new geographies as well as diving into fisheries work, which will create positive impacts on the water. Sophika is deeply committed to building diverse networks of passionate individuals who share this collective vision of the world in which they want to live. She's got 20 years of experience, much a part of her life, you can say, judging from my conversation with her a little while ago, leading an environmental and social justice campaigns through the globe. She's created California's organic seafood labeling bill, shaped supply chain transformation in the forest sector with Canopy Planet, and secured legislative reform on environmental rights across Canada. Sophika feels a great sense of urgency, and I urge that we too feel that, to turn the tide on unsustainable fishing practices. And it's convinced that humor and humility are essential components of any transformation. Brilliant, Sophika. I mean, no question, in all its seriousness, I mean, we can only get home, through this with humor and no question, humility as well. Other speaker, Laura Hardman, is going to talk to us on plastic-free oceans, and she leads that initiative at Ocean-Wise, bringing together fantastic initiatives, including the great Canadian Shoreline cleanup, the Microfiber Partnerships, Plastics Lab, and Plastic Reduction Program, in pursuit of our ambitious 2030 targets, and ultimately to protect our oceans from the threat of plastic pollution. Laura holds an LLB and PG Dip in Corporate Social Responsibility and Sustainability from Birkbeck University of London, Starting her career in sustainability in 2011, Laura has worked as a member of multinational corporations with a focus on delivering systemic change and lasting social and environmental impact. Laura is a passionate advocate for the restoration and regeneration of oceans. Most of all, she believes that each of us have a role to play, that we can all and should be a force for good. So both these issues, I think we should be a force for good. It's not only them out there who are doing the hard work. I think each of us has a role to play, as small as it is, if we can. But I'm sure there's something out there that we can do. And I'm convinced that after listening to Laura and Sophika, I'm sure we'll be motivated enough to go and do that little bit that we can do to address both of these very serious issues. With that, let me hand over this session to Sophika to kick off proceedings. And Sophika, lovely having you again, and let you take the floor now, the virtual floor.
Perfect. Are you able to see my screen?
Lovely.
Okay, thank you so much. What a beautiful introduction, Graham. Thank you so much. I couldn't agree more that we all have a piece to play in this giant puzzle. I love the action item that you were mentioning earlier about the mural and everyone coming out. That is a perfect form of activism, of expressing yourself, of joining together in a community that shares the same vision for the world in which you want to live. So I wish I was there to be able to join you tomorrow. So thank you, Graham. Thank you, Zainab, as well as all of the WNPS for hosting myself and my colleague Laura tonight. We are thrilled to be here and share a bit of our expertise with the audience today. And also a huge thanks to the Canadian High Commission for making this lecture series possible for Oceanwise conservation. As Graham mentioned, I'm Sophika Kostyniuk. I'm the director of the Fisheries and Seafood Program at Oceanwise Conservation Association. This organization has been growing sort of organically over time. It has been established for over 60 years, starting with the Vancouver Aquarium. But over the last several decades, we've expanded into many new areas of work, including seafood, plastics, research, work in the high Arctic, and a very robust education program. Today, I'll be speaking with you specifically about sustainable seafood and my program's journey into this space, as well as the learnings that we've acquired over time. But everything that we've done in the last 16 years has been deeply rooted in our pursuit of ensuring that oceans stay healthy and abundant. It is a steep hill that we have to climb, but I believe that it's possible to turn the tide, not only on sustainable seafood, challenges facing sustainable seafood, but of course also ocean plastics. So when we look at photos of our beautiful blue marble from space, it's absolutely undeniable how vast the ocean is. And though we say we have many oceans, it's actually one body of water encircling the entire planet. And the water moves around, the species within it move around. It connects everything at a very deep level. It covers 71% of the Earth's surface and holds an astounding 99% of all habitable space on Earth, including some of the largest geological features, the deepest trenches on the planet, as well as the largest mountain ranges. And of course, we know that life began on Earth, so some of the oldest forms of life, in the oceans, so some of the oldest forms of life still remain deep in the oceans. But of course, despite its seemingly endless space, the oceans are in peril, and we as humans are individually and collectively responsible for the demise of numerous creatures, habitats, and ecosystems that support and sustain us as humans. The oceans produce an incredible amount of oxygen. 70% of the oxygen that sustains life on Earth supports us through food sources. As Graham mentioned, over 1 billion people rely on fish as their primary protein source around the world. That number is starting to increase because people are also preferentially choosing seafood over land-based protein forms like beef, chicken, pork, and so on. 2.8 billion people, so a third of the world's population, lives along a coastline. We see the ocean every day. We are deeply interconnected, economically dependent on the ocean. And so it really is upon us to begin to change the plight of the oceans. One of the most dire situations facing the oceans today, one of the greatest threats, is overfishing. And simply put, overfishing is the removal of too many fish at once so that the breeding populations do not have an opportunity to replenish themselves. That's all it is. The ocean as the last frontier is incredibly sensitive to the pressures that we place on it. And overfishing is one of those pressures that is really sort of a nearsighted approach to how to pull resources out of the oceans. We are absolutely not advocates of people stopping to eat seafood. In fact, we want people to be able to eat as much sustainable seafood as they like. And there are absolutely ways to do this. But currently, the dominant form of fish coming out of the sea is through overfishing practices. So why does it matter? What are the conundrums that are presented through overfishing? So overfishing not only impacts the specific species. For example, if someone is, a company is out there trying to fish a specific tuna species, it's not only the tuna that are being impacted, because it often comes down to the gear type that is being used. What nets are being used? Are there long lines being used that are catching unintended species? Things like albatross, tuna, dolphins, turtles, even manta rays sometimes get caught up in these nets. It's heartbreaking. I'm sure that you've seen the photos in the last many years. Other types of gear that are used are bottom trawls, and actually around Sri Lanka, that is a common problem in your exclusive economic zone, that bottom trawls are used, and that simply drags a net with a heavy weight at the bottom right across the bottom of the ocean floor, and it rips up habitat. It rips up those critical nurseries for fish where they would otherwise be replenishing their stocks. So we have loss of biodiversity through overfishing. We have habitat destruction and unintended species being caught. So Sri Lanka is beautifully blessed with its geographical positioning because of the tropical nature of the sea and the Indian Ocean surrounding Sri Lanka. There is an absolute abundance of seafood, rich natural abundance of seafood. And Sri Lanka is a significant exporter of your seafood around the world, which you can see on the right-hand side. Many countries around the world are enjoying the species that are coming out of the oceans in your exclusive economic zone. Some of the most prominent and voluminous species are things like Spanish mackerel, skipjack tuna, yellowfin tuna, other forms of tuna. That's a big group there. Sharks and skates, rockfish, prawns, lobsters. So that's all coming out of the marine environment, but there's also a very actively growing aquaculture industry in Sri Lanka, either land-based for things like carp and tilapia, or marine-based in the open net pens as well as shrimp farming. And we'll get into that a little bit further on in the conversation. So not only is this a significant export product to the tune of $250 million in 2018, but it's a significant employer for Sri Lankan people in primary activities, such as actually catching fish, but also in processing fish, distributing fish, as well as boat building and maintenance. So at any given point in time at present, there are over 2,000 Sri Lankan fishing boats in offshore waters. And this industry, not just boat building, but catching fish, processing, distributing fish, employs over 270,000 people directly. 7% of those are women. And then we also see this happening in the land-based aquaculture sector as well. So it's a very significant industry. Interestingly, as I was reading about this, oh, I'm sorry, I'll just go back one slide. As Graham was mentioning, that the global statistic is that every person on the planet is consuming around 20 to 22 kilograms of fish per person per year. In Sri Lanka, that number is far higher. On average, Sri Lankans eat over 31 kilograms of fish per person per year. So for this reason alone, I would say that this issue is so relevant. If you love seafood, you want to ensure that there is a long-term availability of this protein for you, your family, your friends to enjoy. And you can do so if the fish that you are eating is caught sustainably. If it's not, we will quickly run out of various species of fish. So what are some of the other conundrums that overfishing presents? It's very difficult actually to measure how many fish are coming out of the ocean within a given year. And the reason for this is that there is a significant amount of illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing going on, to the tune of 1/3 of all fish coming out of the sea is not managed, not counted. It's happening in these far off remote places where there's no oversight, no policing. But the best estimates are that around 32 million metric tons of fish are illegally coming out of the oceans and not being reported. So what does that number actually equate to? If you think of the entire population of Indonesia, plus the entire population of Thailand, the combined weight of all the people in those two countries is how much fish is illegally coming out of the water every single year. And on the right here, we can see a very unfortunate image of a typical bycatch that is unused. It's usually thrown back into the sea. This is from a shrimp trawl fishery. So how did we get to this place actually? It's not that long ago that all seafood coming out of the ocean was sustainably caught. Going back as far as we know in human history, we have been enjoying and relying upon seafood to feed ourselves. And in areas like China and other parts of Asia, there are many documents and documented sites of aquaculture, so fish farming, that were being done sustainably. These were usually very small scale operations, land-based, typically of vegetarian species, carp and so on. And this was all sustainable. But around the 1950s, a significant shift began to happen. And you can see the change in these two maps on the left, paralleled with the difference between these two boats on the right-hand side. So in the past, fishing took place near shore. Very, very specific species were being caught, and the fish was not being distributed globally. As industrialization ramped up, the fishing boats gained all types of new technology. They could go out to the deep ocean for far longer. They could catch far more fish. And then global trade began opening up. So the fish began moving around the planet. That opened up people's palates and interests for different types of species, which continued to increase and increase the pressure on fishing. So we can see this happening with the boats on the right-hand side. The top one is a boat from the 1950s, would go out for a day trip, catch the seafood, return to shore, and very likely sell it locally. The giant ship below that left port in Berlin in 2018. This is a super trawler. It has onboard processing facilities. It has onboard freezers. These boats can stay out at sea in the high sea for many, many weeks at a time. They often feed their catch into something called a mothership that simply goes around collecting fish from a number of vessels similar to this, and then distributes it to processing facilities around the world. It's just mind-boggling how quickly this technology has evolved. But don't lose hope. I don't lose hope. Hope exists. And the reason being that hope exists is that we know that we can do better. We have proven methods to fish better, to pull fish out of the sea in a far more sustainable manner. And there is a global community that has been growing over the last probably 20, 25 years that is very much aligned in their vision of the world in which they want to live and the type of seafood that should be offered. So you'll see different labels popping up in the marketplace. I believe that in Sri Lanka, the Marine Stewardship Council, the MSC logo, is something that many people will be familiar with. Our logo, which is the Oceanwise logo, is predominantly found in Canada and the US, but we are expanding around the globe in years to come. But you'll see many, many logos on products, and a number of those organizations behind the logos are very much aligned on the fact that we must know that the species being fished are able to rebound in their populations, so healthy and resilient stocks, that there is effective and adaptive management. We need oversight by either government or global bodies to ensure that, that we know what is actually coming out of the oceans, from where, and whom is taking this catch. There is a lot of illegal fishing, and in fact, around Sri Lanka, there are many documented cases of foreign vessels coming in and illegally catching fish from your exclusive economic zone. And lastly, many, many of these groups are aligned on the fact that we need to limit those negative impacts of bycatch, of habitat destruction. And with these three key ecological criteria, we say, okay, this product is recommended, it's Oceanwise recommended, it's Marine Stewardship Council recommended, it's recommended by another body. Go ahead, as a consumer, as a restaurant, as a retail store, go ahead and buy and sell this product. So just wanted to give you a few quick ideas and visuals of the types of gear that are used to pull fish out of the water. The top one is a trawler. This is a smaller scale trawler, but it is a bottom trawler. You can also have something that skims through the middle of the water column called a mid-water trawl. But this is a very typical one where you can see there are weights and wheels down at the bottom, just kind of dragging along the bottom of the ocean. And unfortunately, this does rip up anything that's in its way. So corals are pulled up, and various other habitats. Not always are bottom trawls problematic. If you're actually operating in a place where there's a rocky bottom or a sandy bottom, that won't negatively impact that habitat. So there are locations around the world where this type of fishing method is recommended. Next, we have a purse seine. This is literally a giant net that cinches up at the top like a little purse and catches everything that was encircled when the net was dropped down into the water. Not selective at all. So this is where we see a lot of bycatch in the forms of anything from turtles to dolphins to sharks to rays, because these nets are huge and they just pull up all the creatures that are in that immediate environment. Lastly, sort of a very common type of fishing as well is pole and line. Very selective. So if you're going out tuna fishing, you have one pole, one hook, and you're going to catch one fish at a time. From an ecological sustainability perspective, this can be extremely sustainable, highly recommended. The problem comes in from a social justice, human labor rights issue, which we currently do not incorporate into our recommendations, but it is something that we are committed to building out over the next 5 years. And that's labor issues. So people that are often recruited to work on these boats don't do so voluntarily. There are many infractions, and we see issues like slave labor, forced labor, child labor showing up on these boats. So that was wild capture fisheries. For aquaculture or farm species, there's actually 10 different criteria that we look at when we're assessing these types of operations. It seems far more complicated, but in reality, it's far easier to assess because in a farmed operation, you know exactly what's going into the system and exactly what's coming out. It's very easy to measure. So we know exactly where the improvements need to happen in order for these types of operations to be deemed sustainable. So I'll just give you an example. The most common and widely consumed seafood product on the planet is shrimp. And predominant in that shrimp category, something that many of you are likely familiar with, are giant tiger prawns or black prawns grown all throughout Asia in these land-based farms. So some of the challenges with the way that these huge operations are typically run is that they are in coastal regions. Very often mangrove forests are ripped up and or other forests are ripped up to put in these industrial sized ponds. Problem being with that is then we see issues of erosion, habitat loss for other marine species, as well as birds and mammals because of the loss of those forests, and many pesticides, antibiotics, and other additives are put into these ponds to ensure the grow out of the prawn species. So there are significant impacts when this large scale production of prawns takes place in this format. A very interesting, probably in the last 10 years, new or maybe a very old form of aquaculture and farming shrimp is beginning to emerge. And we're seeing this really take place in Vietnam, starting to take off in Thailand, as well as other neighboring countries. And this is called silvoculture. So it's working with the natural environment, leaving the mangroves in place and farming the shrimp in within the mangrove forests. So it ensures that carbon sequestration, mangrove forests are incredible harbors for atmospheric carbon. So they hold on to that carbon, not contributing to climate change intensification. We have the shrimp that are coming out of these ponds in a sustainable fashion, and you can actually grow many other forms of seafood alongside the prawns. So it's good for the planet, it's good for people, and it's good for profit. Currently, there's quite a market evolving for this type of shrimp aquaculture in Canada, the US, Mexico is also quite interested, Europe, and that I believe that this is sort of the next trend, and I'm very hopeful that it is the next trend. At present, it's a little bit more expensive to obtain these types of shrimp, but in Canada, for example, we have them in just about all of our major grocery retail store chains. So people are very enthusiastic about the product. And of course, we know that when more and more product is produced, that tends to lower the price. So I believe that over time, these will become equivalently priced to those standard produced black tiger shrimp. Some interesting statistics. This one is specific to the North American market, just how prevalent the conversation around sustainable seafood has become. It is very widely accepted and actually expected that seafood that people are being offered, as well as the seafood that they're consuming, is sustainable. So 58% of consumers believe that they must only purchase sustainable seafood in order to help save the ocean. 88% want better information so that they're not buying unsustainable fish, and 70% more, so 70% want the companies from which they buy to speak more about sustainability. That is a huge and significant and very, very encouraging statistic. So ocean-wise seafood, we work throughout the entire supply chain. We work with those primary producers, either the fishermen or the farmers, and then we work with processors, distributors, suppliers, all the way through to grocery stores, restaurants, food service businesses, and we also have a very active consumer-focused communication program. So we do a lot of work in the social media space and event space. Ways that businesses can promote the fact that they are ocean-wise partners is through simple means. They can post information on their doors when they become a program partner. They can write about it. They can speak about it. They can host events. They put the logo next to sustainable products on their menus. And this has been very, very well received. And we see this movement continuing to grow year over year. We host a lot of events with our program partners. We put out cookbooks, and right now we're very focused on restorative species. So these are species that actually positively contribute back into the environment. Things like seaweed, all forms of kelp, bivalves, shellfish, so mussels, clams, oysters. You really don't have to do anything with these species when you're farming them. You put them in the water, and then they absorb the nutrients from around themselves. They grow, they filter the water. These are extraordinary species from a sustainability perspective, and they are widely consumed. This gentleman on the lower right is a highly acclaimed chef in Canada and beyond, Chef Robert Clark. He was one of the co-founders of our program 16 years ago. And just this fall, he was awarded, we are still over the moon about this, one of the highest civilian honors in Canada, called the Order of Canada. And he was recognized for establishing a program that engaged and educated the supply chain as well as consumers around the issues of needing to improve the health of our oceans through seafood, sustainable seafood consumption. So what can you do as an everyday person, everyday consumer? Well, one, you can absolutely do what you're doing tonight, is educate yourself about these issues. There are endless resources online, of course, to learn more. The one that's up here on the screen is from our program. So it's seafood.ocean.org. And then if you click on the next seafood, seafood.ocean.org/seafood, you can look through over 1,300 recommendations of seafood. So this can be anything from lobsters to prawns to tilapia to tuna to everything that you love to eat. And the platform will produce for you all of the options that you have for purchasing these types of products. And it'll tell you from this part of the world with this type of gear, it's either sustainable or not, according to our recommendation scheme. There are also fully public and transparent scientific reports available. You can just click on those and read them if that's something that you want to do, to gain further insights into what's happening with specific forms of seafood. So I think on that note, I might end. There's much more that I would love to share with you, but I do want to underscore the fact that nature is unbelievably resilient. It will rebound given time and opportunity to do so, and it'll flourish and it'll sustain us for eternity if we care for it, if we are really mindful about how we interact with this huge, source of protein, of oxygen giving life. So we need to ensure that we are not engaging in short-sighted practices that in the end will negatively impact all of us. So all of us have a role to play, and hopefully I've given you some food for thought. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sophika. Very interesting. Sorry, I was in mute. You must have, I saw the look of anguished on your faces. Don't worry. Yeah, can you? Yeah, very interesting food for thought for, not only from a point of view of fishing per se and overfishing, but I think important that all of us who consume seafood go out there, consume it. And, the next time we're at probably a restaurant, we probably need to just have this little question mark and ask ourselves, what are we eating? And probably as it, where it lies in this whole process. Thank you very much. We'll probably get into questions later on, but in the interest of time, I'm going to ask Laura to now address us on the plastic issue. Laura, without further ado, good evening. And yeah, welcome. I invite you to take on the virtual floor.
Good evening and thank you. Please bear with me whilst I look to share my screen. Please do let me know once you can see that presentation with the lovely plastic bottles. I can see Sophika nodding, so I will take that as a very good sign. So first and foremost, similarly to Sophika, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks for the invitation to speak to you today. And thank you to everyone who is listening and who has joined us. But special thanks to the team at WNPS, including Graham and Zainab, and of course the High Commission from Canada. So as has been mentioned, my name is Laura, and I have the privilege to lead the Plastic Free Oceans Initiative here at OceanWise. The Plastic Free Ocean Initiative is a large initiative which covers a number of different programs, which I'm very much looking forward to speaking to you about today. As well as speaking to you about your programs, I would first like to talk to you about the problem that is plastic pollution and look together at some of the issues and drivers. But if I may, I would like to start, and she says, trying to move her screen on. I'd like to start by asking you first to think about a question. I'd like you first to think about, what does the ocean mean to you? And what is your favorite ocean-based memory? The reason I ask is that all of us, all people are ocean people. The ocean gives us life. It gives us the oxygen we need to breathe. It provides food and nourishment. It helps regulate against climate change. It protects us from bad weather events. It provides economic opportunities, cultural and spiritual enrichment, and so much more. And I recently asked a group of 16 to 18-year-old youths who were participating in a shoreline cleanup with us And one of the things that I really enjoyed about their answers that I wanted to take a moment to share with you is that although they all had different experiences of the ocean, they had a slightly different connection to the ocean, they had two very special elements in common. One, that all the moments, everything that the ocean evoked for them, it was always an experience shared with a loved one. And I think that is very, very powerful. And two, it was the way the ocean made them feel. They were very, very quick to talk to the vivid memory they had of the sound of the ocean, the smell, the feel of the waves, the taste of salt. And I think that's very important to bear in mind. I did a piece of research early on in my career, and I remember attending a conference where there was another not-for-profit organization talking about how people feel about the ocean and how we communicate it. And what struck us at the time was that when you think about the ocean in abstract, you might think that, as Sophika pointed out as part of her presentation, it's vast. But actually, all of us, when we stop and think, have a very real connection to the ocean. So I've taken the liberty of sharing a couple of pictures here. And it also forced me, when I asked these youngsters this question, it forced me to remember again and remind myself what my experience of the ocean is. That little picture in the middle, I will confess, is myself on my very first dive trip, as my parents still like to tease me about. But that moment in time, when I cannot have been very old, first sparked my love of the ocean, and it's one of my earliest memories. That picture was taken somewhere in Germany on a very, very cold day. But I have been an avid scuba diver ever since. The picture next to it, that is just of a little islet, was taken a great many years later. But for me, what that represents, and one of the things that I would like to share with you, is that picture was my very first experience of diving in the Maldives. And that trip will forever be one that I hold very dear to my heart, because I got to share some incredible experiences with my other half, diving with whale sharks and manta rays for the very first time. But also, that little islet that you see on the picture, which is probably very familiar to you, that to me represents paradise. But after 7 days out at sea, this was the first time my feet touched the sand again. And other than experiencing those first couple of moments of relief, because I will confess I was a little bit seasick after 7 days at sea, but I started to notice plastic. And I saw one bottle and another bottle, and then a house bottle from a household cleaning product. And the more I looked, the more I found. So before long, I'd asked the guys on the boat to bring over a bag for recycling, and we walked around this entire little islet, picking up all the plastic litter, and we took it back to the boat. And from that moment on, that day will stay with me, not just because of the incredible scuba diving experiences I was lucky enough to have on the trip with people that I loved, but for me, although I'd been working to reduce plastic for a number of years in my career, I'd been to recycling facilities, I'd been working with various companies, and I had seen the tons and tons of plastic waste that is produced and generated. Somehow it hadn't quite hit me on a personal level that that amount of waste had infiltrated paradise. So I hope you don't mind me sharing that with you. I wish I could hear from you about what your favorite ocean experiences are, but it is this moment in time that forever will spur me on in my work. And I hope that each of you have one of those moments that will continue to focus your thinking, particularly as, if I can ask you to imagine one more thing. It is often cited that for every minute of every day, the equivalent of one garbage truck of plastic enters our ocean. Now, in the space of what is hopefully my brief 25-minute presentation to you, that is 25 truckloads of trash entering the ocean in just the time that I'm allowed to speak to you today. Can you imagine how that will affect our ocean in the next 10, 15, or 20 years if we don't do anything about it? And how that might change the memories that our children and our grandchildren are able to make. So with that, Again, it is very widely cited that our ocean is under threat from plastic pollution. That is something that I'm sure no one will disagree on. But if we act now, we know, and the research tells us, that marine life can be rebuilt. We can give our ecosystems the chance to be restored. And we can do so if we act now. But why is plastic pollution a threat, really? What is the problem and why should we care? Quite honestly, plastic pollution is having negative consequences for not just marine life, but also we are very quickly becoming aware that plastic pollution is having negative consequences for our economy, but also it's causing growing concern for human health. So more than 800 ocean species are already known to be affected negatively by marine plastic pollution. This includes all sea turtle species, more than 40% of cetacean species, and 44% of marine birds. We know that microplastics are having negative effects on once consumed, on the growth, reproduction, and survival across a wide range of organisms. And we know that 70% of the oxygen that we breathe is produced by marine photosynthesis. And we know that those phytoplankton and seaweeds that are drawing down that carbon and producing oxygen are being interfered with by microplastic pollution and significantly reducing their capabilities. We understand more and more that microplastics and even macroplastics are carrying and acting as vehicles or transport, not just for invasive species, but also that we know that these plastic products, whatever size, are attracting chemicals and pollutants to them. And we're increasingly finding microplastics in the food web, not just of marine mammals, and our own research team are conducting extensive research on the presence of microplastics in the food web of the beluga whale. But we also know that it is found in our own food web. We are seeing increasing amounts of research that is identifying the presence of microplastics, not just in our drinking water, but also in our food. The scale of plastic pollution. The scale of plastic pollution is huge. And I'd like to start by saying, and again, referencing a couple of things that both Graham and Sophika have pointed out. We know that the global population is growing. But from my point of view, when I'm thinking of dreaming of a world of plastic-free oceans, I am very, very mindful that if we stay on our current course, we are on track to more than double, if not triple, plastic production by 2040. That is huge. With that, an estimated 13 million tons of plastic is estimated to be leaking out into the ocean at today's rates. As I said, if you can picture in your mind's eye that one garbage truck a minute going into the oceans, that really puts things in perspective for me. The other startling statistic that really strikes me, especially when we think about the growing population numbers across the world, but also the growing trends of consumerism and consumption, and with the lens of what we're all dealing with right now in terms of COVID, with the increased use of personal protective equipment and protective packaging, over 40% of plastic produced before the pandemic was designed to be used for a very short amount of time as packaging or as a single-use product. That is 40% of plastic produced is for single use. That means that it is automatically then to be disposed of, hopefully recycled, but as we all know, actually recycling rates are darn low. Here in Canada, they're down at 9%. I believe that they are slightly better in Canada, in Sri Lanka at 10%. But globally, average recycling rates are 15%, and that really is not good enough. And what that shows us is that recycling is not the only solution. It is part of the solution, but it is not the sole tool in our toolkit that we can use to tackle this crisis. Plastics have been found now everywhere scientists have looked, from the very bottom of the ocean to some of the highest peaks. I'm sure you've probably seen some of the research that was conducted on Mount Everest, for example, where they found plastic and microplastics. Our team of researchers also recently published their findings of microplastics in the Arctic. And I'll share a few of those stats a little bit later with you. But what was really significant is that we found in all of the samples that we collected in the Arctic, we found that almost all of the samples contained microplastic. And of those pieces of microplastic, a vast majority of them were from synthetic fibers that had a similar signature, if you will, and were identifiable as being from synthetic fibers such as those used in the apparel and textile industry. We estimate that 80% of plastics that leak out into the ocean today are from land-based sources. Again, that is huge because that is very, very preventable. Again, not just with recycling and improving the way in which we manage our waste materials, but by reducing the waste we generate to start with. There are 5 main product types that I would like you to think about whether you use in your day-to-day life. But there are 5 main product types, which according to the Ellen MacArthur and Pew Trust report, make up 85% of the plastic that's leaking into our oceans. This includes the films, both single polymer and multi-layer films that you might use in your kitchens, for example, or in your supply chains you might receive from your suppliers. It includes carrier bags, bottles, and other household goods. And I think for me, 2 of the things that really stand out when I'm on beach cleans, both here in Vancouver, in Europe, and in Africa, bottles and those household goods really do stand out in my mind's eye of things that I've seen with increasing frequency. And I'll share with you a little bit later, we have, as part of our shoreline cleanup, what we call our Dirty Dozen scorecard. So I'll show you what most frequently appears on our shorelines here in Canada. The root cause is not that plastic itself is a problem. We know it's a useful material. That's very evident during this pandemic. We know it's lightweight, so in terms of a global supply chain, can potentially help reduce our carbon emissions. But we seem to have got to a point where as society, we are very, very prepared to accept plastic as a default, to accept it as the material of first choice. We have got into a position where we are very prepared to throw it away, even though we don't actually necessarily think about what away means as a society. We don't necessarily attribute it to have any value. And one of the things that I always like to think about is in a number of businesses that I've worked in over the years, I'd often go in and find that they were throwing away without thinking a product like aluminium. And as I'm sure you know, aluminium has a very, very good market on the a very, very good secondary market. So it is worth at volume, if you're talking by the ton, it is worth a lot of money. So when you put that into a business case, it becomes very, very easy to make the case for the business to go to the effort of recycling, if there isn't incentives in place in the country or the municipality. But what we don't have often with plastic is we do not have at the moment a good global market for recycled material. There are a number of drivers of that that come down to things that arguably are as simple as the colors and dyes that are used in the different types of plastic that are preventing a good market, because as we know, a lot of the brands like to have and have very strict brand guidelines when it comes to the color and the quality of their packaging. But it also comes down to maybe other more complicated design features where you'll have polymer companies that do not want to take back another companies recycled material because they don't know exactly what is in the recipe. They don't know what additives that another company or what chemical makeup the other company might have used to create that plastic, even though it is technically the same polymer type. We as a culture have become increasingly, and as a global community, have become increasingly consumerist and convenience driven. And one of the things that again jumps out at me, particularly over recent months, is whilst we have across the world sort of pivoted to support local food and beverage and restaurant businesses, for example, I don't know about you, but I have definitely seen a rise in takeout, in single-use food and beverage packaging out in the world, out on our shorelines. And that strikes me that it is now more important than ever to be embedding these principles, not only of good practice when it comes to litter, but also raising awareness of the other alternatives, such as your own takeout container, and the best ways to handle that waste and that material once you've generated it. And last but not least, we just don't have the systems in place to manage all that we produce. Again, it is a problem that is not unique across the world. As I said before, we're only globally, there's an average of 15% of plastic being used that's recycled. That is staggering. And whether it is mechanical recycling or chemical recycling, there is not the infrastructure in place today to handle what we produce. So if nothing else, as I've said to you earlier today, if you take one thing away, it is that recycling is a very important part of the solution, but it is not the only solution. So I would urge you always to think about whether you really need a plastic product or item, or whether you can rethink or reinvent a different way of serving your customers, or a different way of making your life convenient. I'd urge you to think about refusing plastic when it's offered, not just accepting it as default, to try actively to reduce your footprint, to reuse what plasticware you can. And when it comes down to it, make sure that you understand what can and can't be recycled and the best ways to do that. One of the recycling companies that I work with on a regular basis, one of their main challenges is people contaminating waste streams. So it's where there is a lack of understanding about what material can be placed in what recycling bin or infrastructure, leads to whole loads of recycling not being able to be actually recycled because it might have been contaminated with food, for example, or a different type of material that can't be processed and now can't be sorted. Oh, I skipped on too far. And please do give me a time check, Graham, if I'm not being fast enough. What's our approach ocean-wise? So for us, we are very much focused on science to solutions. So as I said, now we've talked a little bit about how we understand the problem of plastic pollution. I'd like to share with you and hopefully spark some ideas of things that you can do yourselves, but I'd like to share with you our approach. So our approach is focused on three main pillars. So we think very much about, as I said to you, about how we can radically reduce, rethink, or reinvent plastic use in our world. So we're looking to empower others through science with solutions so that we can ensure that we are supporting the radical reduction of plastic use. We are supporting that plastics can actually be valued and considered valuable. So we're empowering that market for recycled materials. We're incentivizing waste segregation and recycling, and we're providing the decision-making tools to allow people to design for recyclability. And we really are stopping the leak of these macro and microplastics from getting out of that system where plastics can be valued and into our oceans. And the way we do this is through these three pictures that I have on my screen here. We are lucky enough at OceanWise to have our own in-house laboratory and team of scientists that are working very, very hard to close a gap in understanding that exists when it comes to macro and microplastics. as much as I've already talked about and shared with you some of our knowledge and understanding of the problem, there is still what's the word I'm looking for? There is still a widely acknowledged understanding that there are huge gaps in the research. There are huge gaps in what we do and don't understand about how plastic is getting to the ocean and what solutions would be most effective. And last but not least, what impact it truly is having. I gave you the statistics about 800 different species being negatively impacted, but what we don't know is at what concentration. What we don't know is how those microplastics move when they're in the ocean. But there is research, including our own, being produced on an almost daily basis at the moment. One of the things we've identified as Oceanwise is that whilst there is a ton of research being done out there, one, it's not necessarily at the pace. Research can be slow. And whilst it's very, very valuable and very, very important to be rigorous, there is a bit of a disconnect between the scientific community and and sometimes the policymakers and all the businesses who are looking to make decisions now because we are at a crunch point. We need to be taking action. So we're doing our best to close the gap in understanding between scientists in the academic community and those who are going to be able to make decisions based on that information. We see very much that science just doesn't just take place in our labs. I love our citizen activation programs and our citizen science programs. They are so valuable, not just to get young people involved in the science, to get and to have the opportunity to connect people back with nature, but the data that they produce is truly valuable. The Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup has been going since 1994, and I will share some more information later. But one of the things that we are most proud of is that we have policymakers actively using this data to inform policy. And last but not least, multi-stakeholder partnerships. I've mentioned repeatedly now, please forgive me, that there are a number of solutions that need to be deployed in order to reduce the threat of plastic pollution. But what I will also say is, as much as there is no one solution, there is no one actor, there is no one government or the UN, there is no one business that can turn the tide and stem the flow of plastic pollution. This is a systemic issue. We cannot act alone as Oceanwise, as any other party. We have to do it, and we will have the greatest impact if we do this collaboratively with people from across the plastics value chain, from policymakers to citizens and everybody in between. We should all be part of designing the solutions. So what does that look like in practice, and what can I share with you about our learnings? So the lovely picture here is two of our researchers out collecting samples of microplastics. The reason we have an in-house laboratory, as I said before, is to close those critical knowledge gaps that we've identified as being barriers to organizations, to policymakers making those responsible decisions for the ocean. So our starting point as Oceanwise is always to stop and say, what is the ocean telling us? What do we know from the data that we're collecting from the oceans? And we have a program called Pollution Tracker, which is actively collecting samples from coastal sediment and from mussels, looking at plastic pollution and capturing data there, but also from other sort of coastal sampling that we do on a regular basis. What is the ocean telling us about the state of microplastic pollution and macroplastic pollution? And we do this so that we can best design and inform the most effective activities and interventions, as I say. And the more we understand and can characterize and can identify the types of microplastic that exist out in the oceans, the better we are informed to take the right strategic action. So our objective here really is to continue to improve the understanding of the sources, fate, and impacts of microplastics. One of the barriers that's been regularly cited over the last couple of years to making progress in this space is that there is no standardized or widely accepted methodology for the quantification and identification of microplastics. So this is something that our lab are very passionate about and are working towards. We have a very specific piece of scientific equipment called the FTIR machine that allows us to see almost the fingerprint or the DNA of individual types of microplastic. And we are, I should say also that our principles as a scientific lab is always to ensure that all data we produce is open source. We do not believe that any research that we uncover, any insights that we find should be held back. We believe they should be shared widely to allow others to act. So our research, as I said, it comes and we're focused on a number of areas. Our specialty, I would go as far as saying, is microfibers. And one of the pieces of research that I mentioned earlier was the piece on the marine, the plastic pollution that has recently been found in the Arctic. What was fascinating about that study was that, as I said, 79% of samples contained microplastics. And of that, the vast majority of the microplastics that were found were indeed from or had the same sort of signature and characteristics in terms of size as well as shape as we would expect to be found in the apparel and textile industry. We also found that from the weathering patterns, so one of the fields that we've focused on at the plastics lab is we understand with microfibers and plastics in general that they weather over time. So we have created and we continue to build upon our database where we can understand how that signature, how that fingerprint of microplastics changes over time, the longer it's subject to ocean conditions. And what that piece of research seemed to indicate in the Arctic was that actually the microfibers were moving, and they were moving from sort of south up towards the North Pole. So that was really fascinating. Other research streams that are very, very active for us, I will talk a little bit more about our work with the Microfiber Partnership later in the work we are actually doing with the apparel and textile industry. But two things that we are very passionate about at the lab is one, working with municipalities and wastewater treatment facilities. It has been broadly identified that one of the key areas of activation to prevent plastic leaking out into the environment is to have better practices and better interventions at wastewater treatment plants. So we're working very closely with a number of municipalities to understand the quantity and the characteristics of the microplastics that are being released from wastewater treatment plants, but also from stormwater and wastewater overflows. And last but not least, we, as you can see from the picture, we have identified that there is a gap in the research when it comes to the impact of microplastics on zooplankton. So whilst there's been a number of pieces of research that have, as I said, indicated that it inhibits things like the ability to participate in the carbon cycle, what is not or less well understood is the threshold or the impact of different saturation levels of microplastic. So what we're looking at is we're taking real-time samples from the ocean with representative levels of microplastic pollution and studying zooplankton to better understand the impacts. I'm going to skip on because I'm very aware that I could talk to you about this all day. I mentioned before that I am very, very passionate about citizen science. I really think that we cannot be doing enough of this. Whilst we know that picking up litter is not going to solve the problem, it is such valuable data and is such a valuable awareness raising exercise. So for us, since 1994, we've had over 937,000 citizen science participate in our Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup. And that equals over 44,000 kilometers of trash, or of kilometers cleared of trash, with over 2 million kilograms of trash removed. That is a fantastic number. What we have seen, so we're expecting to hit our 1 millionth participant. We were expecting it last year, but as you can imagine, because of COVID, it's not necessarily safe to gather in your traditional shoreline cleanup groups. So we're hoping we're going to hit our 1 millionth citizen scientist this year. But as I said, and skipping, it is not just about the litter that's collected. This is such a great opportunity to engage with other people about your habits, your consumption. It's amazing the conversations you can have even within your own household when you go down to the shoreline, and you might see items that you use regularly on a day-to-day basis that are there. I've seen it promote and provoke conversations with different groups of youth about what can and can't be recycled, which ultimately helps them improve their understanding and use better practices moving forwards. And as I've said before, this is such a valuable source of information to help us better inform decision makers. So every year we produce what is called the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup's Dirty Dozen list, which is the 12 items that we found most commonly on Canadian shorelines. Now for us, not dissimilarly to data from across the world, cigarette butts come up time and time again as being some of the most commonly found items, but is very quickly followed by tiny plastic, food wrappers, bottle caps, and then other items such as paper materials, plastic bags, beverage cans, plastic bottles, straws, and the like. One thing that I will share with you is anecdotally, we haven't yet had the data in and fully verified from 2020, but we have, as I say, anecdotally heard from participants and certainly in my own cleanup experience that we're seeing larger volumes than we have before of personal protective equipment, as you might expect, but also larger volumes of those food and beverage containers as people look to support those restaurants locally. Now, this data, as I've said, not just used by policymakers and scientists, but also used by ourselves. So one of the things that we identified, as I've just alluded to, is that it's food wrappers, it's bottles, food and beverage materials make up regularly the top 12 materials found on shorelines. So with that in mind, a couple of years ago now, we launched a Plastic Wise campaign. And this was a campaign where we invited, again, citizens from around the world to engage with us and pledge to reduce their plastic use. We have over 18,000 citizens across the world that have pledged to reduce their plastic use and counting. Once you sign up, you are directed to the website or through the website to participate in a number of challenges where we've identified some simple tips and some quick wins that you might like to do over the course of a month to try and reduce your footprint and change your habits. What I will say is I would love anyone who's interested to sign up to the plastic reduction program, and you can find it at plasticreduction.ocean.org. But I would also say watch this space, because in the spirit of citizen science, what we are also doing is we'll be soon releasing an at-home plastics challenge where we'll invite you to measure the plastic waste that you are using in your own home. And I think from we've done a couple of trials now. And again, what's been really, really interesting is, I don't know if it's something that you've participated in already, but what we found with our participants so far is that very few of them had realized the volume of material that they were throwing away and that they were recycling. So we're very excited to see what results that information and that piece of citizen science yields. And last but not least, the multi-stakeholder partnerships. As I mentioned, there is not going to be any benefits to trying to tackle this challenge alone. And one of our key principles as OceanWise is really to create a safe space for collaboration. We have a couple of partnerships that are very, very active at the moment. Possibly the most well recognized is the Microfiber Partnership, where we work with a number of actors from across the textile and apparel value chain. From some of the big outdoor apparel brands like Arc'teryx, Patagonia, and REI, as well as some fashion brands and beyond. We also, as part of that forum, work with policymakers, other researchers, and scientists. And really, it is about creating that space where we can have those difficult and challenging conversations. Our focus continues to be on closing the knowledge gaps to empower those organizations to make science-based decisions to design for reduced shedding, for example. One of the pieces of research that we produced as part of the Microfiber Partnership was a report called Me, My Clothes and the Ocean. And what we identified, or what we looked at as part of that report, is we looked at the microfibers that are shed from your clothing during household laundry. And what we identified was that over 533 million fibers are released per household in North America per year. That's 533 million fibers that are then going out into the wastewater system, which is why the wastewater system is another important point of intervention. And I talked to you a little bit earlier about the research we're doing there. That is the equivalent, that sort of 533 million fibers, that is the equivalent of 8 blue whales ending up in our rivers, lakes, and oceans every year. That's huge. And once those microfibers are out into the ocean, they're almost impossible to recover. So what we're doing is we, as I said, we're working with some of the leading brands, producers, innovators to really design and implement design thinking. We're also evaluating filters that can be put into washing machines. We're exploring other solutions such as using alternative materials. We're looking at different ways of dyeing and finishing products, for example. But what I will say is we, moving forwards, are increasingly looking at the supply chain. And I know that Sri Lanka, for example, is a huge producer of textiles and apparels. We would love, and we are starting working with our current partners to understand what the impact of microfibers are in the supply chain, because that is less well known, less well researched, and less well understood. And what we do know from our research at the consumer end is that the first time an individual washes their clothes, that first wash of a new item of clothing, is where the majority of fibers are shed. So with that logic, what we now want to explore is, if that is where most of the fibers are shed, are there other interventions at the point of manufacture or the point of weaving that we can implement to reduce microfiber shedding out into the oceans? And the last program that I will speak to you about today, I promise, is the plastic reduction program that we are running with restaurants and food service businesses here. This is a very new program. Again, we identified this as being an important program based off the information that we were collecting through Shoreline cleanup. And having run the Plastic Wise program, where we had a number of individuals sign up to take the plastic challenge, we had requests from restaurants and hotels and other businesses to say, how can we get involved in this challenge? So what we have done is we have worked collaboratively with restaurant partners that we were originally very kindly put in touch with by the Oceanwise Seafood team, led by Sophika. We reached out and we started to understand with them where their main pain points were. We started to understand with them what they needed to empower them to make the more responsible, more ocean-wise decisions. And what we've developed is a tool that first and foremost helps them measure their plastic footprint. So I mentioned that we will be soon inviting individuals in their homes to measure their plastic footprint. We were surprised to find that very few businesses were measuring their plastic footprint. And once you've empowered them and once we've supported them to identify how to measure their plastic footprint, we then work with them to identify solutions that might be most appropriate for their business. This is commonly a misconception that using an alternative material or an alternative business model is going to be expensive. often there are actually cost savings. It does not have to be, this is about, and the only way you can be a sustainable business is if you continue to make money, otherwise there is no business to be sustainable. So we're very, very mindful of that, particularly in the current context. And once we've identified the 1 or 2 solutions that are right for that business to start to implement, we ask them to commit and to share their progress. The reason for this is we really would like, as part of this plastic reduction program, to bring businesses with us on a journey to reduce plastic. We don't mind where they are on their journey, whether they have already stripped out most of the unnecessary plastic, or whether they haven't even begun and they just want to support as to where to start. So we will continue to build out resources as we partner with our restaurants and other businesses going forwards. And if anybody is interested in some of those resources, please don't hesitate to reach out. I will close now by reflecting with you briefly that, again, we are all ocean people. Hopefully you've enjoyed hearing about some of the problems related to plastic pollution and some of the work that OceanWise is doing to implement science-based solutions. I've said it before, but I will say it again. There is no single solution and no one actor that can stem the tide of plastic pollution, but we all have a part to play. We can all think about reducing, reusing, and recycling. And by working together and separately, we can make a difference. This is not about being perfect. This is just about taking action and taking action now. So I would love it, and maybe as part of the Q&A, I'd love to hear some of the actions or activities that you might be taking away or thinking about tomorrow at work, at home, or at school. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks. Yeah, interesting, very interesting indeed. I have to squeeze some questions in because we are really trying to struggling a little bit on time. So I'm just going to bump straight into it. And my questions for you, Sophika. I'll probably keep alternating to keep a little bit of diversity in it. Yeah. Sophika, see, one of the something that's coming up is, there are a number of rating agencies and certification programs for sustainable seafood and marine stewardship. There's Seafood Watch, there's Fishwise, Fish Choice, Fishery Progress, etc., etc., etc. Now, quite a lot of these organizations and ratings agencies, how does it work in terms of certification programs and interpretation by consumers? Really, how does it work? Are they all pointing in the same direction? Is there anything that you can enlighten us on that?
Yes, absolutely. And a fabulous question. So seafood continues to be the most complicated food system on the planet. As mentioned in my presentation, seafood travels around the globe, sometimes several times between when it's caught and when it lands on your plate. So it goes through multiple jurisdictions, it gets processed in different facilities, labeled many, many different ways, depending on the requirements of the country where it eventually ends up. Extremely complicated and confusing. So it's very, very important for you to have your sort of go-to either certifications or ratings programs that you trust. And the ones that I would recommend that you trust, of course, our own, and I'll tell you why, but many others are out there doing very, high quality, transparent work. But what you want is something that is transparent, accessible, clear, and consistent. So for example, we work with 43 other groups from around the globe in an alliance that is called the Conservation Alliance for Seafood Solutions. And you can look that up online and see all of the member groups. But we have members from China, Japan, Brazil, Costa Rica, South America, Australia, everywhere else, Netherlands, France, and so on, that, as I mentioned, are all aligned on those basic principles of needing to know where the fish was caught, how it was caught, and yes, so the method of catch, the species being caught, and where it was caught. Those are the three basic criteria that help us and our alliance members know how to assess that species. And then you'll see things popping up like a stoplight system, red, yellow, green, for example, Seafood Watch, or sort of yes or no recommendations like our program. You'll either see the label on a product or not. So again, it does take a bit of research. Find the label that you trust, that you can access and understand, and then start asking for that in the marketplace.
Thank you, Sophika. I'm running to you, Laura, now. Two-pronged question. One, I think you'd have probably answered many, many times. But the other one, I'm just going to make it two-pronged. Various people at different points of view. PPE, post-COVID, masks and plastic pollution, has it increased or not? Number two is, what are the recycling initiatives that you're seeing? Definitely, it's a problem. We've seen, obviously, they're going into the sea somewhere. What are the recycling initiatives you're seeing for personal protective equipment, Laura?
Oh, very, very good question. So first of all, are we seeing an increase? Our data from Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup is not officially out yet. But anecdotally, yes, we are seeing slightly more. But and I believe that is shared. That is what I am seeing from other parts of the world. But what I will caveat that with is certainly from our point of view as Oceanwise, PPE is not something that we have measured historically because we just weren't seeing it. So it will be the first time that we have really proactively measured that. Before, it would have been captured on our scorecard as other. In terms of innovative ways of recycling PPE, again, that is fascinating. My first point, where public health guidance allows, would always be to opt for reusable masks, for example. Unless in very specific circumstances, certainly public health guidance that I've seen from around the world has been that reusable masks, when properly taken care of, washed, etc., are perfectly suitable and perfectly protective. But I will caveat that with, I'm not a public health expert. And also following on from that, where it's not possible, or whether what innovative recycling ideas am I seeing? I am seeing some chemical recycling being used, for example. I am also seeing organizations using material recovery, so burning for energy recovery, for example. But obviously that too has inherent complexities if you look at an overall environmental impact.
Fantastic. I'm sticking with you because it's virtually on the same subject. Very fundamentally, again, I don't know whether you've seen, but we've had some fantastic bit of innovation to collect and to stop plastic waste going into the oceans in Sri Lanka, because we got a lot of canals and waterways, and we got a lot of life on either side of these waterways. Lots of little houses, and so it's quite a challenge. And that's now open source technology. But what initiatives and what type of technology? I don't know whether I missed it, but I didn't really pick it up. Have you at Oceanwise? It's not rocket science, as it were, but is there any sort of technology that is used to address this issue?
Oh my goodness. I mean, as you say, there are so many really exciting bits of technology, some super simple, that are being used all around the world for recovery. And I'm not sure if I caught the question right, but in rivers as opposed to in the open ocean, is that correct?
Yeah, anywhere where, addressing the root cause, it's coming in from inland. There's no question. So how do we address that one?
So to your, exactly as you just answered, actually, for me and for Oceanwise, whilst we start at the ocean and say, what is the water telling us? What is the ocean telling us? It is about tracking it back to the root cause, and whether that and that ultimately starts with designing for recyclability in the first place, or designing not to be a single-use product. So our efforts are very much focused on working with organizations to rethink and reinvent what they're using when it comes to plastic packaging, for example. I mentioned the Microfiber Partnership and working and looking at different materials and different ways of using material in order to reduce shedding. As you say, when it comes to litter, what we have seen used successfully are things like sea bins, for example. Again, as you say, it's not rocket science, but it's about interventions. We're seeing cleanup activities, including our own Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup, stopping litter from washing out into those rivers. From a policy point of view, extended producer responsibility, I have seen examples of that in Sri Lanka, and I would love to learn more about how successfully you feel those are being implemented. But certainly for us here in Vancouver, although we are, and in Canada actually, we have examples of extended producer responsibility being implemented slightly differently in slightly different municipalities across the country, which is a little challenging. So I would always advocate for really clear, really consistent and sort of nationwide policies on extended producer responsibility.
Fantastic, thank you. And Sophika, I'm going to give you, in the interest of time, a bit of machine gun fire, quick questions, bang, bang. Okay, so first one, see, you're talking about, you see, all this is to do with human behavior, and people and organizations need to be motivated into acting, into changing behavior, and ocean-wise certification for one. Now, supply chains, motivation of supply chains and equity in supply chains to ensure that compliance, there is compliance right throughout. How does it, I mean, you're talking from right from where the fish is caught from the fisherman right to the restaurant owner probably. So how do we see reward and how do we see equity build across the supply chain?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So what are the motivators to incentivize change? And it comes from both ends of the spectrum. Producers, suppliers, retailers, restaurants will be motivated to seek out and produce seafood sustainably when they know that the demand is there from consumers and from end buyers. So that is how our program has historically operated, and we will continue to work that way, where we provide tools and motivation to those end consumers, whether it be everyday people or grocery stores, restaurants, so that they know the questions to ask of the supply chain, of the producers. And then we also work with the producers, suppliers, and those sort of end to mid supply chain actors to help them understand how to change their practices, whether it be implementing different gear types, whether it be sourcing from different regions of the world, so that they can supply as much sustainable product as possible to those demanding it. Governments play a really important role, but governments tend to respond slower than corporations and businesses. So we have had lots of success with many government policies around the world, but it's faster, I think, a lot of the time to create change on the water through motivation, through economic incentives.
Fantastic. And the next one, very cliched, but still doesn't lose intensity, this question. I mean, all of us live in houses, all of us are consumers at the receiving end of personal care products. I mean, from a toothpaste to creams to everything. And we know what it comes in, right? So where is, yeah, what exactly? And we all, I mean, let's face it, we all contribute. What is how do we compress changeover, and what sort of technology, and where is it lying where companies can actually move into alternatives? I mean, it's commonly asked, but I said the question, intensity of the question is always there. Where do you see, are you saying that we should really expedite this, and how organizations like you helping in that process, Laura?
Great question, and a couple of answers to that. One, I think sometimes it's not always about looking forwards and looking for the next innovation. I confess, especially the last couple of years, I've been looking to my grandparents for inspiration. My grandmother used to make her own soap. She used to, so that's one of the things I've taken on. To wash all my dishes, to wash hands, liquid soap. I've found a way to make it, and I'm going to stick with that. No more plastic products. But as you say, yes, particularly if you go in and we joke sometimes internally about doing a Marie Kondo of plastics. But if you to go into somebody's bathroom, for example, it took me a very long time to get my personal plastic footprint down there. But there are products out there now. There are things you can do. On the reduce side, there are increasingly brands offering things like concentrated bars for your personal care products, your shampoos, your conditioners, your moisturizers. There are alternatives to the traditional toothpaste tubes, for example. And I've gone very bathroom specific, so I'll try and come up again into a more overarching answer there. You're also seeing a number of businesses rethink their service delivery models. So not always in every country, but around the world, you have some of the bigger brands looking at refillable models, for example, where you can bring back your container and refill whatever product it is that you want. And any way in which we can incentivize that as society, I think is brilliant. You're also seeing brands being willing to take back their packaging, and maybe it doesn't get refilled directly by you as a consumer in your interaction with your immediate vendor, but maybe the brand takes that back and either recycles it or refills it after a thorough sterilization process. You are also seeing in some parts of the world, some brands, soft drinks brands, for example, one comes to mind, where they have agreed to forego the traditional branding of the bottle type, for example. I'll leave you to guess which brands, and have just said that there is a standard bottle that is refillable by all brands, which is fantastic. And then the last but not least is try and be smart and try and challenge yourselves with the packaging that you are buying. Can you buy in bulk, for example? And so therefore you have less packaging over time? Or can you, is there a product that you can swap to, or you might already be in the product with the most recyclable packaging, most recyclable packaging in your municipality? And the very last piece I will say is raising your voice is always helpful. We as OceanWise take it upon ourselves to raise our voice to try and work with people to improve their footprint that empowers citizens and individuals. But one thing I learned being and working for businesses over the years is they care about what the consumer thinks. So the more we raise our voices collectively, the more influence we will have. So if we all turn around and say, hey guys, we want refillable packaging, it will happen.
Okay. And one more question, Sophika, and a quick answer, please. But I have to ask you this. We got probably a minute left, minute and a half. Again, interestingly, communities, fishing communities, and fishing. Some of them do it out. I'm not talking about big commercial fishing. I'm talking about communities that live on a daily wage off the sea, and sometimes they are involved with probably nets that they're not supposed to use. It would I call illegal fishing. They probably know it, but they can't. That's a way of life. They got to feed their families. Interestingly, how do you go out there into communities, and have you anything you'd like to comment on that, and how you can work with and through that problem?
Two quick things. One, OceanWise is embarking on a very exciting journey starting last week, actually, to begin working with small-scale fisheries around the world, because they are, what you say, very distributed, very small, very unique in so many instances. So it's difficult to sort of coordinate and have impact at scale if there aren't those centralized big players. But this is a space that we and the big Conservation Alliance for Seafood Solutions community is committed to investing in from today moving forward. 50% of the global catch plus is caught by small-scale fishers. So this is a significant area of opportunity. A lot of the time, the small-scale fishers are doing things very sustainably. because they don't use motorized transport. They target specific species, so there's not a lot of bycatch, not a lot of habitat issues. It's just we need to all learn more about what is happening in that space. So I would say over the next decade, we will see some significant gains in understanding what is happening there, some significant opportunities for small scale fishers to access those more lucrative markets that will begin seeking the products that they're producing. So it's a very exciting time of transformation in the small scale fishery space.
Fantastic. I think in the interest of time, we got to bring down the curtain on this very interesting session. Sophika and Laura, thank you so much for the interesting conversations on behalf of WNPS. And again, thanking the Canadian High Commission for this collaboration. It has been very eventful. Thank you very much. And to our audience, thank you for being with us. It's been almost 2 hours. It's been a fantastic evening. Thank you very much all. Good night. You guys have a good day out there. And thank you for joining us so early in the morning. Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.